Hello and welcome to Heart Yoga Radio. We're having one of our walks through the Welsh Hills again today. We've been talking for the last few days about the Northern Ireland crisis, which is currently beginning to erupt. And I think it probably is just the beginning, unfortunately. And I think this podcast is going to be a bit more of a discussion around this topic because we did find it difficult to come up with a definite angle because this is just such a messy, complicated problem. And really, I don't think we can say that the violence in Northern Ireland is triggered off by just one thing. Although I think the Northern Ireland Protocol and Brexit is definitely the last straw to any tensions that there were there already, regarding opposing points of view and beliefs about things, but also a lot of people are just really distressed and angry because of COVID, and they're kind of on their last nerve already.
Yeah.
So the thing we've been talking about a lot really is just lies. The government lies, and particularly Boris Johnson's lies, saying very definitely there'd be no checks between Great Britain, Northern Ireland. He said it over and over, drunk and sober, to all sorts of people, recorded for posterity. Said it on the radio and the TV, clips of it on YouTube. It's the thing is, right now, it's like very, very demonstrably a total and complete lie. And, it's always been said that, Brexit fantasy, reality, when they collide, the reality is going to win.
Yeah.
And it is winning.
Of course, it's the reality principle that drives home in the end. Though it's amazing how long it can be put off and deflected and denied.
Yeah.
And there's like still a huge level of denial, and you wonder what it would take for Johnson to plummet in the opinion polls, for instance.
Yeah.
Now, the bloke. And if you do need any convincing, and I'd urge you to look up at a guy called Peter Stefanovic, and he's pretty active on Twitter. He's a trade union bloke, and he makes these videos of Johnson addressing Parliament or being interviewed or speaking in some kind of public forum. And then Peter Stefanovic puts out the clip, and then he interrupts it and says, "That's a lie," and then he comes up with chapter and verse on why it's a lie.
And there's loads of things. There's loads of things like that all over YouTube and Twitter and alternative media.
Yeah, he's got a sort of a 10-minute video about half a dozen Johnson lies.
Well, people have written books about all Johnson's lies, like a whole book full of them, and they said we couldn't even fit them all into this thick book. There's been so many.
Well, there's Peter Oborne, right? He was a right-wing, and a self-confessed conservative, small c perhaps these days. Absolutely damning. His what you might call, the party of his natural affiliation. He has a book called The Assault on Truth. Peter Oborne, a right-wing arsehole, and even he can't stomach it.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a philosophical point in the Northern Ireland thing, it is the post-truth thing that I keep going on about. The assault on truth. It's kind of been so profound for a number of years, so remorseless, that the concept of truth and the concept of knowledge is barely functional in its kind of ordinary sense. Now, I mean, the philosophers philosophers have agonised for millennia on the exact nature of truth, and it's an extremely thorny problem. But nevertheless, I don't think we should let that interfere with our ordinary discourse, with its general decency, reliability, and groundedness in stuff that actually happens, in facts, you might say, without getting too worried about the metaphysical problems in asserting that definition. And we certainly, definitely, in this kind of post-truth era, And Johnson and many of his colleagues, to my mind, do not have a functioning truth-telling apparatus. Can I put it like that? They're actually not capable of it. And perhaps this is a little bit fanciful, but I see Johnson applying the tactics that he must have applied in the dormitories at Eton and in the rough and tumble of a boys' boarding school to survive psychologically. Play the fool, be the entertainer, and get popular that way and survive that way, and dissemble and lie and tell different people different things. It's almost like this infantile strategy that he was forced to adopt. That has the kind of nature of a trauma that makes the bloke incapable of telling the truth. Now, in the case of Northern Ireland, we know that some people are interpreting riots on the streets of Belfast, Londonderry, and also some smaller Northern Irish towns as being a reaction to the lie that was told that there would be no border down the Irish Sea. And in fact there is, and there's no kind of proper system for trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, the big island in the British Isles, Great Britain. And this is obviously anathema to hardline unionists, because their thing is a very vehement assertion that Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and evermore shall be. A fanatical commitment to that political arrangement. So obviously this is a hard one for them to swallow. At the same time, the Good Friday Agreement that did bring peace to Northern Ireland, the army is no longer policing the streets of Northern Ireland, the British Army, and there's a free and open border between the Republic and the Northern Ireland 6 counties, and that open border is a part of the machinery of the agreement. But of course, Brexit was always going to produce a contradiction. You can't have it both ways. You can't have the open border and yet at the same time have Northern Ireland outside the EU and a part of the United Kingdom which exited the EU. So whichever way you turn, you can't win. Well, I don't know, people like John Major and Tony Blair, all ex-Prime Ministers, neither of them I've got much time for, but at least both of them warned this in 2016 in the run-up to the referendum, the Brexit referendum. There's no way you can have it both ways. But Johnson is there on record, and people really enjoy retweeting and rebroadcasting him saying, if you get a load of paperwork to bring your goods across the border or from between the UK and Northern Ireland, throw them in the bin. Phone me up and tell me what's happened. Just throw them in the bin. Fuck it. It's like there won't be a border. Of course there has to be. You can't have it both ways.
What the hell was he thinking? I think he's so publicly and say that over and over again.
He was lying for public consumption. And so, okay, is this... I've heard many explanations now, and you've been doing the same. You've been looking at as many different takes as we can on it. And I've sort of watched stuff from DW, which is the German state broadcaster, which does do an English language channel, so you can see what they think has gone on. Representatives of unionists, the DUP, representatives of Sinn Féin, representatives of the SDLP, the Labour movement, school kids, what they think's happening, a whole host of commentators, specialists and just general loudmouths. And there's a lot of different explanations. One of them is that there's a great deal of anger about Johnson's lawyers. And to actually hear somebody spout that out in a very loud voice on Radio 4 Today programme, which generally I would say goes very, very light on Tory politicians and the establishment. But they let that one through. Somebody just saying, Johnson lied about it and everybody's angry.
Yeah.
And it has early on, it did result in shortages in the supermarkets, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think it still might be. I mean, British business is in nearly in tatters.
Yeah.
So the Irish business must be even worse.
Yeah, I mean they've took a hit because of it. Yeah, definitely. Now somebody else said that it was to do with there was an IRA funeral. A prominent IRA person died. And a number of Sinn Féin members of the Northern Irish Assembly, the Stormont, the devolved parliament in Northern Ireland, attended this funeral. And the rule in Northern Ireland was that under COVID rules, only 30 people can attend a funeral, and there were far more than that. And should these Sinn Féin members of the Assembly be prosecuted? And it did go to the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions in Northern Ireland, who decided not to prosecute. So there's a claim that the riots are due to unionists being very disgruntled about this special treatment of IRA people. Irish Republican Army, in other words, people who had belonged to the military wing of the Republican movement that is still, in its own self-understanding, waging a liberation struggle. Obviously, they've laid down the violent means, the bullet, decommission their arms and all the rest of it under the Good Friday Agreement. But let's pursue the aim of a united Ireland through political means as Sinn Féin, which is a party that stands both in the Republic, where it did very well in the last election, and in Northern Ireland, and has members in the Stormont. With a power sharing agreement between Unionists and Republicans. So some people think it's down to that. Now it's interesting that the demographic of the relatively small numbers of people rioting, throwing petrol bombs at the peace walls, at these kind of segregationalist walls between the different communities. In fact, they did hijack a bus and set it on fire, and they're throwing petrol bombs at the police, armoured vehicles that the police have got. And they seem to be like school kids. Some of them are as young as 11, I've heard, 14, 16, 18. And they're being egged on. Initially it seemed to be mostly a unionist Protestant thing, though last night or the night before the police turned the water cannon for the first time in many years in Northern Ireland on a crowd of Catholic youths rioting somewhere. So some people have put forward the theory that this is what it's called. This is a great term, this recreational rioting.
Yeah.
And one of these school kids, sort of 17, 18-year-old kids, said that when they do still have occasional riots in Northern Ireland. When they do have a riot, they do it for the buzz and the crack, as he called it. They just do actually like going and having a bit of a pitched battle with the cops. So what is going on? Is it recreational rioting? Is it the insult to unionism that Johnson's lying and the actual existence of some kind of a hard border down the Irish Sea? That's caused them a great deal of offence given their world view. Is it unionist offence at what I perceive as the police and the prosecution services being rather soft on the Republicans who attended the IRA guy's funeral. Bobby Story, who I think was an IRA intelligence guy. So what is it? What's going on here? You know.
I think it's just like a combination of stuff, and
It is, yeah.
And the protocol was just like this is like the last straw, really.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the protocol is bad for everybody, absolutely everybody, because it's very, very difficult to get goods across the border. They can't even trade with their own country anymore. It's very, very difficult. The stories coming out of different businesses, even just as, like supplying like essentials. I think a lot of people are very worried, like on both sides, like what the hell's going to happen.
Well, I think there is some serious worry about this because the White House intervened, and as you know, the Americans were a signatory to the Good Friday Agreement. They brokered it. They're guarantors to it, and an American senator, George Mitchell, chaired the meetings in 1998, and President Clinton sent Senator Mitchell to just chair the meetings. So even the White House is saying, well, it's basically you're getting it from all sides, and everybody's got to do this, even if it's only for appearances. They've got to call for calm, you know. Somebody like Matt Hancock, though, says, "Oh, this is a policing matter, and policing is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. It's one of the devolved powers, policing, and that this is a policing matter. So it's just like a Saturday night ruck, you know." But there is deep concern, you know, and because Johnson has expressed worry and concern about it. But for fuck's sake, you know, man, he just got lied. In 2016, you know, John Major and Tony Blair saying warning, and we said it, we spotted it straight away. We said, God, they're going to throw Ireland under the bus here, because it's not good for the Republic either.
No,
you know, it pushes them in an awkward
Bad
position.
for everyone in Ireland, this is.
Yeah.
I mean, Brexit is bad for everyone in the whole of the UK, but it's really bad there. That's where they're seeing the worst signs first.
Yeah, well, it's going to be. It's the fault. It is the absolute kind of fault line, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if the original Brexit that was promised and that was campaigned for, i.e., single market and customs union, which Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson said we've got to at least belong to the single market, would have solved all this. It's because they then went for the hardest Brexit they could get away with, which was never ever promised in the referendum. Lies again playing their part, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's stories every day of like more and more people coming out and saying we were lied to. I wouldn't vote for Brexit now if I'd have known this was going to happen. Like, for instance, all the fishermen who are now utterly trashed. Like the fishermen who bought an extra boat for 200 grand because they believed the lies that it was going to be like golden forever and they were going to make fortunes every day. And now he's never even taken the boat out once. Yeah,
and the mussel farmers and the chocolate manufacturers and
they're absolutely trashed.
Yeah, I mean, from the point of view of basic commerce, it's like idiocy. Unless, you know, disaster capitalism can do quite nicely out of it.
Yeah.
You know, and as I say, you have to remember that the city of London isn't a geographical location. You know, it's a set of relationships and multiple locations for doing finance capital with virtually no regulation. That's what it is. And we're all living off the back of finance capital anyway. We're all in a sense like being given a kind of a UBI by finance capital. That's the basis of the UK economy. But and Brexit doesn't jeopardise that. It gives them more opportunities in a sort of medium long term. Strange as it might seem. Given, you know, that sort of certain finance companies move to Frankfurt and Amsterdam and Paris, whatever. Jacob Rees-Mogg takes his hedge fund which is his chief activity, to Dublin. And he's the biggest Brexiteer, hard-line Brexiteer, WTO rules, free trade. Completely economically illiterate, the bloke is. He's good at hedge funds, I dare say, but it's a very narrow skill. And he takes it to Dublin. And he don't care. He says, well, this is normal. You take your fund where you get the best regulatory environment, So the philosophical takeaway here is post-truth. The political takeaway is that you lie consistently to people. And you place that in the context of material deprivation, like trouble getting certain things in shops even, food shortages, that kind of stuff. You lock them up under sort of lockdown rules for like a year and a half, and eventually they're going to go mad. I mean, some of these teenagers who I was listening to today, they were saying that it's been absolutely horrible for them.
Irish teenagers.
Yeah. Well, Northern Irish teenagers, Belfast teen.
Yeah.
What's it like for you? And it's absolutely fucking horrible. We don't know where to turn. And I mean, some of them were saying that they thought there was just an explosion of frustration, rage, anger, partly as a result of that, Okay,
COVID.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right.
And
they're all so kind of pissed off and distressed already.
Yeah,
There's not going to take much to set them off.
No, to get out there on the streets and start chucking petrol bombs. But I think there was some my own view that was that looking at the few bits of films of what was actually going on, that there was a certain or a jouissance of destruction, joy in destruction. That there was that it was like a kind of a carnivalesque. There was some sort of like joy in just like smashing stuff and burning stuff and let's go and break some shit.
Yeah.
That there was that, and you could.
Well, it's them taking back control. That's what that's the feeling that they're getting when they're doing that. Is they're taking back control.
Yeah.
And
they're all kind of mashed up, and the police are kind of taking films, whether they're going to be able to identify people. But of course, eventually somebody's going to get killed, So the political takeaway is the multi-causal, but not surprising. And Brexit, I agree with you, is sort of like the spark, or the tinder, perhaps. Maybe Brexit supplied the tinder for those with political commitments. I dare say some of them kids don't know what the protocol is, I wouldn't be surprised. Did you know about stuff like that when you were 14,
No.
I
had to work quite hard to actually understand what was going on in the whole of Ireland, really.
Irish history is a nightmare.
Yeah. To understand how, how the idea behind... so we've got this border between Northern Ireland.
Well, how did that ever happen?
I don't. And how all of that was possibly going to work in the Brexit scenario, really. Yeah. It's almost like they kind of have to pretend that the border between Northern Ireland and an EU area, it doesn't really kind of exist. We'll all sort of pretend that doesn't really exist.
But it does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I say there's a philosophical, this deep question that I can return to again and again and again, and of which I have like thousands of pages and notes for future podcasts and series on truth, post-truth, and the decay of rationality in public affairs and in public discourse. That's a philosophical point and also an historical point. Political point. Well, there is a lot of deprivation in Northern Ireland. It is like the fringe of the United Kingdom. And economic downturns and so forth hits Northern Ireland particularly hard. Unemployment, youth. It's youth that are out there chucking stuff. I think they're very much in perceiving their situation as one in which there is no future. Right? There's a kind of a political point that people will rise up Sometimes in kind of like mindless rage and pure mob behaviour. Other times in focused and directed revolutionary ways. The historical point about, well, like the whole history of Ireland, if you wanted to go into that, you know, I mean, this is a situation, is a legacy of empire and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of colonialism. These legacies roll on, and that's a point I always want to keep making. You know, they roll on, they become intergenerational. You know, if a whole community is less privileged, it doesn't hand on patrimony to its children. It has less patrimony to hand on than richer factions of a community or a society. So, just in that way, inequalities and divisions roll on over the generations. So there's a whole lot of historical stuff we could go into, and it is very, 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 very worth a study. It's a fucking heartbreaking story, you know, the story of colonialism's impact on Ireland. And there's also like psychological aspects to do with identity, which I've always found very interesting, you know. And that I think plugs into identity politics, because there's a lot of what happens in Northern Ireland is identity politics. You know, and you've got these two communities, the one Protestant, ultimately of Scottish descent, taken over to man the best land in the north of Ireland, in what was called the plantation, and as a means of marginalising the Bolshie Irish Catholic Celts into marginal land out in the kind of the hill country, thereby producing two antagonistic communities. Antagonistic because one section of that community is more privileged than the other section. You know, and that more privileged Protestant section is given its origins, is committed to the union with the United Kingdom. The other segment, Catholic, Irish, committed to continuing the Irish struggle for independence from the British Empire, the hegemon as it was at one time, by having a completely united Ireland. You know, so in a sense, this division of Ireland into the 6 counties in the northeast and the rest was a compromise. So you have warring identities. It's like the basis for the conflict is who you are, who you perceive yourself to be, and the willingness to do violence to others on the basis of that identity. To identify people outside your group as other. And of course we keep going on about this otherisation being one of the main tricks of the hegemon, the ruling class, to divide any opposition that there might arouse. You know, and of course in Northern Ireland you see all this panning out. And of course we've got modern identity politics. This is based on the same idea that identity matters. And of course, as an item of human behaviour, humans can be induced to, or will, behave in very destructive and violent fashion to people who do not share their identity. So identity is a very interesting problem. And I think the attachment to identity is very interesting. I mean, I understand it, and I kind of think it's daft all at the same time, you know. I don't think we should trample over vandalise other people's cultures, you know. Which, of course, the English have done absolutely with a passion for hundreds of years, you know, from annihilating Native Americans in Canada and the US, you know, to destroying the Irish language almost, destroying the Welsh language almost, doing all kinds of nefarious and destructive shit in India and all the rest of it, and Africa, with missionaries and, you know. So it's sort of like, and yet there is something intrinsically sort of daft about identity. it's a very kind of flimsy construction. And where you're born and which community you sort of technically belong to is just a pure accident of birth, isn't it? Just a pure accident. So why, on that basis, why do you want to endow it with any significance or importance? That's a kind of narcissism, kind of quite pernicious narcissism, which of course, but it's a tendency that gets exploited by powers to divide and rule communities. So why aren't we having a revolution in mainland Britain against the absolutely lying Tories that have destroyed the economy, killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people through the mismanagement of the pandemic, and just carry on lying and lying and lying through the teeth as the economy fucking spirals into fucking oblivion? Why aren't we having a revolution? We should be having a revolution. Because we're too busy fighting each other on the basis of identity. And it can get into a kind of, I mean, basically, I think it's identity. You have an identity. You were born somewhere. You speak a language. Get on with it. Live and let live. Let's celebrate difference. You know, I see a lot to celebrate in difference. And one had hoped that Northern Ireland had sort of gone somewhere down that route, you know, given that it's been relatively peaceful since the Good Friday Agreement, and you could count that as a success. And there was a whole generation growing up that didn't know the troubles. These kids that were talking on this forum, sixth formers, Belfast kids from different. There was even like a Muslim young woman from Sudan, I think, somewhere like that. And they never knew the troubles. Even though surprisingly they were still self-identifying as you know, as Republican or Unionist and so forth. Even though they did seem, in general, fairly alarmed by the violence or by violence, by the idea that difference should give rise to violence, which I think's something that one wants to see. So there's a whole issue there around the psychology of identity and the perhaps diversionary and unproductive nature of identity politics ultimately. Yeah. So there's a whole kind of lot of questions around that. So that's where I'm taking from the Irish thing. We don't really know exactly what's going on in vis-a-vis causes. This violence seems to be multi-causal. But certainly people are unhappy. And there are lots of reasons for that. What always interests me about these situations is what philosophical problems that they throw up that we might be able to throw some sort of fairly tight, rigorous and careful analysis at, with a view to producing some clarity which will then tell us how we can act to put our society out and our culture and our economic organisation on a better footing. And one can hope just be at least a small part of that conversation. But yet there are philosophical issues around truth, there are psychological issues around identity, and historical issues around how did we get here, history, and political issues around lies in public life.
The thing that we do definitely know is Johnson lied. He lied about what Brexit was going to be, made people vote for it all based on lies, lied about what was going to happen to Ireland, although anyone with half a brain knew that this was going to happen.
Well, we said it.
Yeah, you know, he was like well predicted years ago that this was going to happen. So that's what we do know, and that's the thing that I'm most interested in here, because if the lies aren't challenged, and it's grindingly difficult and boring and repetitive, and it's like you don't want to waste your life having to challenge the lies all the time, every day. But if somebody doesn't do it and they just get away with it, I mean, we're all going straight to hell.
Yeah.
Really, I can't see anything else happening.
Well, Peter Stefanovic, who's really got he's like a terrier with a rag, has now had 8 million views of his little nice, neat 10-minute video of all the cases where we've got absolute equivocal proof of Johnson lying over it and over and over again.
Yeah.
8 million views. I mean, it did it like 1 million last week, and if he keeps circulating, if people keep helping him to circulate it, by the time of the next general election, everybody in the country will have seen it.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the disturbing thing is that, the press normally, most of the press normally backs Johnson up in the lies.
They do, yeah.
Although, this is why I think this one is interesting and could be different, because I just can't see how he's going to wriggle out with this one. I mean, they've even managed to spin it in the past. Johnson lied about something and there were horrible consequences, and somehow the press managed to spin it that Johnson was a national hero.
Yeah, I know.
They
do.
But this time, I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Hopefully this is the moment when Johnson is finally caught in the sticky web of his own lies and can't get out.
Well, yeah, hopefully. Well, say even the BBC gave a platform to somebody who was very vehemently asserting that this flare-up of violence in Northern Ireland was pretty well down due to Johnson's lies about the border. And
Yeah, well, there certainly are people in Ireland who are really angry about the fact that they were lied to.
Yeah.
And the consequences of those lies have destroyed their lives.
But the BBC generally does, certainly like the Radio 4 Today programme, really, which millions of people listen to in the morning and on the way to work and over at breakfast. And it's a long programme. I think it's 3 hours or something every morning, Monday to Saturday, I think. Certainly Monday to Friday. So they've got a huge influence, huge audience. Pretty well consistently back the Tories. I mean, they go through the motions of grilling somebody like Hancock, but if you compared with what they do with somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, it's ridiculous. They give him a ridiculously soft treatment. Remember, the new chairman of the BBC, who is appointed by the government, is somebody who donated £400,000 to the Tories last year or whenever it was. It's a complete fucking...
It's very cheap to buy the Tories these days, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is pretty well a propaganda mouthpiece for the establishment. And yet, they allowed this, they platformed this person willing to very vehemently and very plainly state that Northern Ireland's going up in flames because of the fucking lies told by this Prime Minister and this Conservative government. That's huge. I think the papers could turn on him, and they do now, though they're being a bit less forgiving.
Yeah.
But of course, obviously, the alternative media, which we were always trying to promote, are all sort of taking a much more critical view, and you are able to actually get quite a lot of different takes on it from different parties who are on the ground in Northern Ireland. And as I say, there are a number of interpretations and a number of theories. And I think you have to sort of take that on board. And the reality probably, my intuition says the reality is that we're looking at resentment, perhaps almost formless resentment in some instances, of quite high intensity, anger of quite high intensity, with multiple causalities, and nobody's surprised that it happened. We were saying in 2016 we were saying they're throwing Ireland, meaning both parts of the island of Ireland, under the bus.
Yeah.
And it gives you no pleasure to be right yet again about the consequences of the idiocy of these fucking post-truth, hyper-capitalist, monstrous psychopaths who, for some fucking unknown reason, people vote into power.
Well, they're just brainwashed into it and lied to. That's how it works.
You have to keep exposing the lies, I suppose, don't you?
Yeah.
And this is always a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's kind of, it doesn't feel very good for the soul to have to kind of focus on them all the time. Anyway, we've come into the end of our walk, so I hope you found that interesting. Bit of a ramble, but there's a lot going on. I wouldn't be surprised if things are really different in 2 weeks or a month.
Yeah.
And we're making a podcast about a whole new set of things going on in Northern Ireland. Anyway, it's been nice to to be here talking to you all, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Make knowledge great again.